The email arrived on a Monday morning that was definitively London. Rain lashed against the window pane of my cramped flat, a relentless drumming that echoed the anxiety thrumming in my chest. Final interview. Viridian Industries. The subject line declared stark and bold against the muted gray of my inbox. For a heartbeat, a fragile warmth flickered within me, a desperate hope against the encroaching chill of despair. Months of relentless, spirit-crushing unemployment. Months since the ambitious tech startup, my brainchild, my obsession, had imploded in a spectacular public failure, leaving me adrift in a sea of rejection and mounting debt. This was it. Viridian, a leviathan in the green energy sector, a global powerhouse whose very name whispered of innovation and success. I devoured every piece of information I could find on them, their annual reports becoming my bedtime reading, their mission statements practically tattooed onto my brain. Just securing this final interview felt like a victory against the crushing weight of my recent failures. Stepping into the Viridian headquarters was like crossing a threshold into another dimension. The air inside hummed with a hushed, almost reverential efficiency. Glass and steel dominated, reflecting the muted London light in sharp, unforgiving angles. The reception area was vast, minimalist, a cathedral to corporate power, a stark contrast to the chaotic, brightly colored co-working spaces I'd become accustomed to during my startup days. A woman emerged from behind a pristine white desk, all tailored suit and glacial politeness. "Mr. Davies?" she inquired, her voice crisp and devoid of warmth, confirming my appointment with a swift tap on a hidden screen. She was the epitome of Viridian efficiency, a cog in this vast, well-oiled machine, and I felt a sudden, sharp pang of inadequacy. She led me through a labyrinth of corridors, each more sterile and imposing than the last, the silence broken only by the soft click of her heels on the polished marble floor. My palms were sweating, my carefully rehearsed introduction feeling increasingly flimsy and inadequate with each step. Then she stopped before a door of burnished wood, its surface devoid of any identifying plaque, and gestured for me to enter. "Ms. Vance will see you now," she stated, her tone neutral, before disappearing back into the maze of corridors, leaving me standing alone, heart hammering against my ribs. I hesitated for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, before pushing open the heavy door and stepping into the office. The room was breathtaking, a panoramic vista of London unfolding beyond a floor-to-ceiling window. The decor was minimalist, yet opulent, all muted tones and expensive materials, a testament to understated wealth and power. And behind a colossal mahogany desk, bathed in the soft, diffused light filtering through the clouds, sat Eleanor Vance. My Eleanor. The world tilted on its axis. Time fractured, the present moment colliding violently with a past I thought I'd buried deep. It had been 7 years, a lifetime in the volatile landscape of memory and regret. 7 years since shared lectures in drafty university halls, since stolen kisses under the ancient oak in Regent's Park, since whispered promises and youthful dreams. Now she was this, CEO of Viridian Industries, a titan of industry, the very embodiment of corporate power. And I, Ethan Davies, unemployed, adrift, and haunted by the ghost of my own ambition, was standing before her, seeking a job. Her name, Eleanor Vance, had been on the company website, of course. CEO, prominently displayed. But my mind, in its desperate scramble for survival, had compartmentalized it, filed it away as irrelevant detail, a defense mechanism against the impossible, the surreal probability of this moment. It couldn't be her, could it? Not my Eleanor. But it was, unmistakably. Though time and success had sculpted her features, sharpening the angles of her jaw, refining the youthful softness into a formidable elegance, the essence of Eleanor remained. The same piercing blue eyes, now colder, more calculating, but still holding a flicker of that familiar, unsettling intensity. The same high cheekbones, the same slight tilt to her head, the same way she held herself, poised and regal, even in repose. She was breathtakingly beautiful, more so than I remembered, a polished, powerful woman who seemed to inhabit a different stratosphere from the girl I had known. And the shock of it, the sheer, unexpected collision of past and present, almost knocked the air from my lungs. My carefully rehearsed introduction, the confident, professional persona I'd painstakingly constructed, dissolved on my tongue, leaving me stammering, breathless. "Mr. Davies," she said, her voice lower, richer than I remembered, yet still laced with that melodic cadence that used to resonate deep within my chest, setting my pulse racing. "Please sit down." It was an order, not an invitation. I obeyed, sinking into the plush leather chair opposite her desk, the vast expanse of mahogany feeling like a physical barrier between us, a symbol of the chasm that now separated our lives. The interview commenced, a bizarre, unsettling dance between the professional and the intensely personal. I managed a semblance of composure, reciting my work experience, the details of my failed startup clinging to each word like a shroud. Eleanor, or Ms. Vance, or CEO Vance, or whatever formal title I was supposed to use, listened with an unnerving stillness, her gaze fixed on me, dissecting, analyzing, as if I were a specimen under a microscope. When she finally spoke, it was to cut through the practiced facade, to delve beneath the surface of my carefully crafted persona. She inquired about my reasons for wanting to join Viridian, and I launched into my prepared speech, extolling the virtues of their innovative sales strategies, professing my genuine admiration for their commitment to sustainability, outlining how my unique skill set could contribute to their continued market dominance. It was slick, professional, the kind of corporate jargon that interviewers supposedly lapped up. But as the words left my mouth, they felt hollow, meaningless, even to me. I could see in her eyes that she wasn't buying it, that she saw right through the carefully constructed veneer to the desperation and vulnerability beneath. Then came the question that shattered the fragile pretense, a subtle shift in her posture, a barely perceptible tightening around her lips, a flicker of something unreadable in her usually glacial blue eyes. "Mr. Davies," she began, the formality of her tone now laced with a razor-sharp edge, "what is your true motivation for seeking employment at Viridian Industries?" The word "true" hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations, with the weight of our shared history, with the ghost of our past. I floundered, the rehearsed answers evaporating from my mind, leaving me exposed, vulnerable. I stammered something about genuine interest, about a long-held admiration for Viridian's work, about not wanting to exploit our past acquaintance. The words sounded pathetic, weak, even to my own ears. I could see the disbelief in her eyes, the barely concealed contempt. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, cold and devoid of warmth, more a baring of teeth than an expression of amusement. "Really, Ethan," she said, using my first name for the second time, the sudden intimacy a calculated weapon in this bizarre power play. "You expect me to believe that you didn't do your due diligence? My name is rather prominent on the About Us page. Wouldn't you agree?" The accusation stung, not because it was untrue. I had seen her name, registered it on a superficial level, but deliberately avoided confronting the reality of it, burying it beneath layers of denial. But because of the icy disdain in her voice, the implication that she saw me as opportunistic, manipulative, pathetic. The interview veered off course then, careening wildly away from the expected trajectory of sales targets and market projections, plunging into the murky depths of the personal, the inappropriate, the unsettlingly intimate. She started asking about my life, my personal life, questions that felt increasingly invasive, like a violation, a deliberate attempt to unnerve and humiliate me. "How many partners have you had, Ethan, since university?" she inquired, her gaze unwavering, dissecting, stripping me bare with a single, surgically precise question. The question hung in the air, thick with unspoken implications, heavy with the weight of our shared past, of the unspoken history that crackled between us like static electricity. I felt a flush creep up my neck, staining my cheeks with shame and discomfort. The sterile office suddenly felt suffocating, the panoramic view of London blurring into an indistinct haze. This wasn't an interview. This was something else. A test? A game? A twisted form of revenge? Ms. Vance, with all due respect, I began, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to maintain a semblance of professional composure. I'm not entirely sure how my past romantic history is relevant to the sales position at Veridian. I tried to inject a note of polite defiance into my tone, but it came out sounding weak, pleading. She simply raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, a silent, chilling challenge. The power dynamic in the room was absolute, undeniable. She held all the cards, and I was utterly, completely at her mercy. Desperation, raw and visceral, clawed at my throat, silencing any further protest. I mumbled a number, a pathetic, deliberately low figure, a desperate, almost instinctual attempt to appear. What? Less threatening? Less promiscuous? More palatable to her bizarre, unspoken agenda? I didn't even know anymore. The interrogation continued. A relentless, probing exploration of my past relationships, each question feeling like a subtle, calculated jab, each answer twisting in the sterile air, distorted and weaponized by the unspoken context of our shared history. It was surreal, humiliating, deeply unsettling, and yet I couldn't afford to walk out. Not now. Not when this was my only lifeline, my last desperate chance to claw my way back from the brink. Finally, after what felt like an eternity trapped under her relentless scrutiny, Eleanor leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking softly beneath her weight. Her expression was unreadable, a carefully constructed mask of corporate detachment, betraying nothing of the turmoil I sensed simmering beneath the surface. "I don't believe you're quite the right fit for our sales division, Ethan," she stated, the words clipped, precise, and utterly final. My heart plummeted, the fragile flicker of hope I'd dared to nurture extinguished, shattering into dust. Another door slammed shut, another failure to add to the ever-growing list. But then, just as despair threatened to engulf me completely, she continued, a slight, almost predatory smile curving her perfectly painted lips, a hint of something dangerous, something thrillingly unsettling in her glacial blue eyes. "However," she purred, the word a low, seductive rumble that sent a shiver down my spine, "I do believe there might be another role for you here at Veridian. My personal secretary position is currently vacant." Secretary. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Secretary. It was a demotion, a blatant insult, a far cry from the ambitious, high-flying sales role I'd envisioned, the position I'd meticulously prepared for. It was a step down, a step back, a step into the shadows. But it was a job, and under Eleanor's watchful gaze, in the suffocating intensity of her presence, it felt less like an offer and more like a carefully constructed cage, gilded and beautiful, but a cage nonetheless. Desperation, that old, insidious friend, whispered in my ear, a siren song of survival, of clinging to any port in storm. "I accept," I managed, the words barely audible, a surrender disguised as agreement. And so began my strange, unsettling tenure at Veridian Industries, under the direct and often utterly perplexing supervision of Eleanor Vance, my former lover, now my enigmatic, powerful, and disturbingly controlling boss. The secretary role was unconventional, to say the least. The tasks themselves were mundane, almost deliberately so. Scheduling meetings, filing reports, filtering calls, fetching her ridiculously specific brand of artisanal coffee. A constant stream of trivialities designed, it seemed, to keep me perpetually occupied, perpetually under her thumb. But it wasn't the work itself that was bizarre, it was the rules. Oh, the rules. They were labyrinthine, arbitrary, seemingly designed to test the very limits of my sanity and obedience. Memos appeared on my desk with alarming regularity, each one outlining a new, increasingly absurd regulation. Protocol regarding inter-office communication with male personnel. Eye contact must be limited to a maximum duration of 3 seconds. Verbal exchanges are to be strictly work-related and kept to a minimum. Another one, delivered with the same chillingly polite assistant, detailed the mandatory lunchtime procedure. Lunch is to be consumed at your designated workstation between the hours of 1:15 p.m. and 1:30 p.m. precisely. No deviations from this schedule will be tolerated. And then there was the infamous Personal Communication Directive. Personal phone calls are restricted to a maximum of 2 minutes per day and must be conducted in the designated soundproof booth located on level 3. All calls are subject to random monitoring. It was Kafkaesque, a corporate dystopia designed by a capricious, albeit undeniably stunning, overlord. The office felt like a panopticon, every move scrutinized, every breath monitored. And Eleanor, she was the unseen warden, the silent observer, her presence a constant, oppressive weight in the air. Her office door remained perpetually ajar, a silent invitation, or perhaps a silent threat. Her gaze, cool, assessing, and unsettlingly possessive, constantly swept across the open-plan office, lingering on me with unnerving frequency, a silent reminder of her absolute control. The unspoken tension between us was a live wire, humming beneath the sterile surface of every interaction, every clipped instruction, every fleeting, charged glance that passed between us. It was a game, a twisted, psychological power play, and I was trapped in the center of it, a pawn in Eleanor Vance's elaborate and increasingly disturbing game. One evening, after a particularly grueling day spent deciphering Eleanor's cryptic post and note instructions, file the Aquamarine reports under Operation Nightingale. You'll know which ones. I never did. She summoned me to her office, the summons delivered, as always, by the impeccably dressed, unervingly polite assistant. "Ethan," she said, her voice softer than usual, almost disarmingly inviting. "I think we both deserve a drink. After work. My treat." It wasn't a question, not really. More of a royal decree disguised as a polite invitation, an offer I couldn't refuse, not without risking. What? Further humiliation? The loss of my precarious position? I didn't want to find out. And against every instinct screaming at me to run, to escape this suffocating web of control, I accepted. The bar she chose was predictably sleek and sophisticated, a temple of minimalist chic, all low lighting, hushed conversations, and the clinking of ice against crystal. The kind of place where secrets were traded like currency, where power deals were brokered in hushed whispers, where the air itself felt thick with unspoken agendas. As we sat opposite each other, the polished mahogany of the bar mirroring the vast expanse of our office desk, the clinking of our glasses a fragile, almost defiant counterpoint to the unspoken history that stretched between us, the carefully constructed corporate facade began to crumble, revealing the raw, vulnerable emotions beneath. After a few glasses of something amber and potent, something smooth and deceptively strong that Eleanor had ordered without even consulting me, the truth, or at least a carefully curated version of it, began to surface, bubbling up through the layers of corporate pretense and carefully constructed defenses. "Those rules, Eleanor," I began, the alcohol loosening my tongue, emboldening me to voice the questions that had been gnawing at me for weeks. "They're excessive, don't you think?" She swirled the ice in her glass, the cubes clinking softly, her gaze distant, lost in some internal landscape I couldn't access. "They are necessary, Ethan," she replied, her voice low, almost a whisper, the words hanging in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. "Necessary to maintain order." "Order," I echoed, bewildered, the absurdity of the situation finally breaking through the carefully constructed politeness. "What order, Eleanor? What possible kind of corporate order necessitates banning eye contact with male colleagues for more than 3 seconds?" She finally met my gaze, her blue eyes, usually so glacial, so guarded, now shimmering with a strange, unsettling mix of vulnerability and something else, something darker, more possessive, that sent a shiver of unease down my spine. To prevent distractions, she murmured, her voice barely audible above the hushed murmur of the bar. To ensure you focus on your work, and to discourage certain tendencies. Tendencies? My mind raced, trying to decipher her cryptic words, to unravel the twisted logic behind her bizarre pronouncements. Then, with a sudden, chilling clarity, it clicked. The eye contact rule, the isolation, the constant scrutiny, the suffocating control. It wasn't about corporate efficiency. It wasn't about workplace productivity. It was about her. It was about jealousy. Raw, irrational, all-consuming jealousy. And it was directed at me. You think I'm going to flirt with the other women in the office? I asked, the absurdity of it almost comical, a dark, twisted joke, if it wasn't so deeply, profoundly unsettling. The idea of me, Ethan Davies, the unemployed, emotionally wrecked shell of a man, posing a romantic threat to anyone, let alone the impeccably professional women of Viridian Industries, was ludicrous. A faint blush, a betraying crimson tide, crept up her neck, staining the pale skin above her tailored dress, betraying her carefully constructed composure, the glacial mask finally cracking under the weight of her own irrationality. It's a precaution, she mumbled, her gaze dropping to her glass, avoiding my eyes, unable or unwilling to meet my gaze and acknowledge the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of her pronouncements. The revelation hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating, heavy with unspoken emotions and twisted desires. It was insane, irrational, bordering on obsessive, a glimpse into the dark, controlling depths of Eleanor Vance's psyche. And yet a strange, unsettling sense of something flickered within me. Was it validation? A perverse form of flattery? Amusement at the sheer, theatrical absurdity of it all? Or something darker, more twisted, a flicker of attraction to the danger, to the forbidden, to the intoxicating power she wielded? I couldn't quite decipher it, but the unease was mingled with a strange, undeniable thrill. Emboldened by the alcohol, by the sheer, surreal absurdity of the situation, and by a reckless, almost suicidal desire to understand the woman who had once been my world, I decided to push further, to finally confront the ghost that had haunted us, both separately and together, for 7 long, wasted years. Eleanor, I began, my voice softer now, more earnest, more vulnerable, the corporate pretense finally abandoned, about university, about why we ended. Her eyes snapped back to mine, the fleeting vulnerability vanishing, replaced by a steely defensiveness, a warning glint that flashed like ice in her blue gaze. Don't, she warned, her voice sharp, cutting through the alcohol-induced haze, the softness gone, replaced by the cold, commanding tone of the CEO. Don't go there, Ethan. It was a long time ago. It's irrelevant. But it wasn't irrelevant. It had shaped us, defined us, cast a long, inescapable shadow over everything that had come after. It was the unspoken foundation upon which this bizarre, twisted power dynamic was built. And now, trapped in her elaborate corporate web, under her watchful, possessive eye, it felt more relevant than ever. The unspoken key to unlocking the enigma of Eleanor Vance. No, Eleanor, it's not irrelevant. I insisted, my voice gaining strength, fueled by years of unspoken regret, unanswered questions, and a desperate need for closure, for understanding, for something, anything, to break through the carefully constructed walls she had erected around herself. I lied to you, back then, about everything. Her breath hitched, a sharp, audible intake of air. Her carefully constructed mask, the impenetrable facade of CEO Vance, finally, irrevocably cracked. A flicker of something raw, something vulnerable, something almost fragile, surfaced in her eyes, replacing the glacial composure. What are you talking about? She whispered, her voice barely audible, the carefully cultivated power dissolving into a breathy tremor. And then the dam broke. The truth, buried for 7 long years, came pouring out, a torrent of guilt, regret, long-suppressed pain, and a desperate, belated plea for forgiveness. I told her everything about my mother's illness, the sudden, devastating diagnosis, the relentless progression of the disease, the mounting, insurmountable medical bills, the desperate, frantic scramble for money, any money, to save her life. I told her about the second job, the third job, the sleepless nights, the crushing weight of responsibility, the gnawing fear that had consumed me, leaving no room for anything else, least of all love, least of all Eleanor. I told her about the lie, the carefully constructed fabrication of indifference, the cruel, abrupt ending I had manufactured to push her away, to protect her, or so I had desperately convinced myself, from the crushing reality of my crumbling world. I didn't want you to worry. I confessed, my voice thick with emotion, choked with years of suppressed guilt and regret. I didn't want to burden you. I thought I was protecting you. The words sounded flimsy, inadequate, even to my own ears, a pathetic justification for the devastating pain I had inflicted. Tears welled in her eyes, shimmering like trapped starlight, blurring the carefully applied makeup, the corporate armor finally, completely dissolving, revealing the raw, vulnerable woman beneath. You left me, she choked out, the words laced with years of hurt, of confusion, of unanswered questions that had festered and festered, poisoning her heart. You just disappeared, without a word, without an explanation. I thought you didn't love me anymore. The raw pain in her voice was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that winded me, leaving me breathless with remorse. I did love you, Eleanor, I pleaded, reaching across the table, my hand hovering hesitantly over hers, afraid to touch, afraid to break the fragile truce that had tentatively formed between us. I loved you more than anything in the world, but I was drowning, and I was too proud, too stupid, too terrified to ask for help. She looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time since I'd walked into her office that morning, her gaze softening, the ice finally, irrevocably melting, revealing the warmth, the vulnerability, the love that I had so carelessly, so cruelly rejected all those years ago. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. "You should have trusted me. You should have told me." The silence that followed was thick with unspoken understanding, with the heavy weight of lost years, of wasted time, and with the fragile, tentative glimmer of hope for a second chance, a chance to rebuild what we had so carelessly destroyed. Later, back in the sterile, imposing confines of her office, the alcohol-induced haze replaced by a raw, vulnerable intimacy, the conversation drifted inevitably to the present, to the strange, controlling rules, to the bizarre power dynamic that had sprung up between us, a twisted manifestation of her hurt and her lingering, undeniable affection. And then, in a moment of reckless abandon, emboldened by a surge of fragile hope and perhaps a lingering trace of the potent amber liquor, I made a suggestion that was both ludicrous and, in the context of our bizarre, twisted reality, strangely, unsettlingly logical. Maybe we could use GPS tracking on each other's phones. I blurted out, the words hanging in the air, ridiculous, possessive, bordering on insane, and yet somehow in this strange, warped world we had created between us, almost understandable. Eleanor stared at me, her expression unreadable, a complex tapestry of emotions flickering across her face. Amusement, shock, intrigue, a hint of something darker, more possessive, lurking beneath the surface. Then, slowly, deliberately, a smile spread across her face, a smile that held a ghost of the old Eleanor, the bright, vibrant girl I had loved, but also something new, something undeniably powerful, something unsettlingly captivating. "GPS tracking, Ethan," she echoed, her voice low and husky, laced with a dangerous, thrilling undertone. "Interesting idea." She leaned forward, her gaze intense, locking mine, holding me captive in the depths of her blue eyes. "Or," she purred, the words sending a shiver of anticipation and unease down my spine, "perhaps a more permanent solution would be more appropriate. She paused, letting the silence stretch between us, thick with unspoken possibilities, unspoken threats. Why don't we just live together, Ethan? Then, she finished, her voice dropping to a near whisper. We can be together always. Everywhere. The offer, or was it another command, another carefully veiled act of control, hung in the air, heavy with both promise and a chilling undercurrent of possessiveness, of something bordering on obsession. Our story, was far from over. And as I looked into her eyes, into the depths of her complex, enigmatic soul, I knew, with a strange, unsettling mix of trepidation and exhilaration, that the next chapter, the chapter we were about to write together, was going to be even more complicated, more intense, and perhaps, just perhaps, even more captivating than anything that had come before. We agreed, or rather, I agreed, to discuss the living arrangements more seriously later, the unspoken question hanging heavy between us, a silent, unsettling presence in the opulent, sterile air of her office. Was this a second chance at love, a fragile, hard-won redemption, or just another, more elaborate, more gilded, more suffocating cage? Only time and Eleanor Vance would tell.